Hi everybody, welcome back to Capricorn Radio. This is your host James, and I'm delighted to have my good friend Gerald Clark and a returning guest back today. And we got a special show today. We have been doing a series of podcasts on his latest book, Seventh Planet Mercury Rising. But today we're going to take a little break from those podcasts for a breather. We're still going to be on the subject of the Anunnaki, and we're going to talk about their home planet of Nibiru. And this is going to be a Nibiru special. And I asked Gerald to do this for a specific reason because, well, there is quite a Nibiru frenzy out there, and big questions. Is it real? Is it coming our way? We're going to get into that, but I don't want to do a normal show. I want to do this from a scientific and logical perspective, and there's no better person to do this than Gerald Clark. And of course, you can follow Gerald Clark's work on geraldclark77.com. You can see everything that Gerald does there, and he has a wealth of information on the Sumerian culture, and he is an independent Assyriologist, and I like to coin that term for Gerald because that's exactly what he is. But today we're going to focus on Nibiru, and we're going to get into, so many things. What we know, analysis, everything we've got, and we're going to synthesize the data that's out there with the purpose of coming up with some answers for the public, because the people really are hungry for this, and it's incredibly important. So without further ado, let's bring on today's guest. Hi, Gerald. You're very welcome back to Capricorn Radio.
Hey, buddy. It's really good to be back. And I think it is timely that we do this. We said we were going to do it, and so I think and based on spending an entire week of focused on nothing but looking into this, I think we have a lot to share.
Sure, Gerald. Just for the benefit of the audience, in preparation for this, you've actually wrote an article. I call it an article because it's quite a large document, Gerald. It's like a mini book, to be honest with you. And you are prolific in everything you do, Gerald, and that's why I asked you, particularly for this show today, to do this from a scientist's perspective and a logical perspective, and you have the goods in that respect, Gerald. But just I'm going to refer people to this document, this article that you have done on the Nibiru analysis, and you'll catch that in the YouTube description. You'll have a link to your site for that as well, geraldclark77.com. It's an incredibly important document you've done too, Gerald, because you have done analysis with graphs, tables, King's List. You've tried that many angles to try and figure out any information we can about Nibiru. Like I say, is it coming our way? Is it even real? What do we know about it? What can we guess, and what can we reduce down to, at least a window of opportunity of kind of, pinpointing some sort of estimation on anything to do with this whole scenario. But so I'll just refer to the audience to that, Gerald. But I guess. For me, the first thing, and I want to mention this, Gerald, is Hamlet's Mill. For me, the Nibiru source that I first came across was Hamlet's Mill, a book by Giorgio de Santiano and Hirschi von Decken, and it's an archaeoastronomy Bible, if you will, and it's been around since the 50s and 60s, Gerald. This is an MIT professor, a history of science, and he's been fully aware of this whole Nibiru, saying that it was the brightest star in the sky. He says there's many other tales in the Sumerian stuff, but this is one that people are going to have to wake up to, and they have to get over this label of mythology and start looking at this in an archaeoastronomy aspect, putting in this comparative mythology and archaeoastronomy and trying to synthesize it, Gerald.
Yeah, I just looked at the reference that you gave me on that book. Mm-hmm. And I was reading through the portion that he was discussing on the Enuma Elish and talking about the names of the planets in their particular celestial battle. And I was fascinated to see that he had access to a version where he was using the name of the Anunnaki home planet, calling it Nibiru, not Marduk, the way the old Babylonian version did. Once Marduk was in ascendancy, he changed the Enuma Elish so that he made their home planet his name. Mm-hmm. And everybody knew this, and Sitchin knew it as well. But I was looking for another source that would corroborate that, and this one did it.
Oh,
and
awesome.
I was really excited to see that.
Awesome. Yeah, and of course, I'm going to link that up in the box as well, Gerald, for people that want to follow Hamlet's Mill. It's actually it's a book that you can get. You can get the whole book online. It's got many ancient cultures in there. It's got many things in there from basically the history of precession and, a lot of archaeoastronomy. All the alternative archaeoastronomers today, they all draw source material from this book. It was like, one of the most important books of the 20th century for me, Gerald. And it's got so much in it. There's a small segment on Nibiru in there, and there's many stuff in there about Sumerian and Babylon.
I think it's amazing. I think it's amazing that it goes back to the 1950s as well.
Some of this research does, it's like it's been floating around down there. We're going to get to Harrington's research as well. We're going to get to some of the IRAS data and the satellite stuff. We're going to get some of the science, Gerald. But, let's talk about the Sumerian Kings list. I want you to tell me, what this has got to do with Nibiru. Why the flood significance to Nibiru? And tell me why we're going to get into the Sumerian Kings list first to tackle the Nibiru question.
Well, when I first started talking about Sumerians, I had to talk about a couple of stories out of the Bible that would connect Western culture over to the Middle Eastern historical record. And one of those was the story of Noah, of course. Well, in that story, everybody knows it ended in a flood. So people have tried to pin down when Noah's flood is to determine when that was, to use it as a marker point in history. Well, if it's true that flood was caused by the passage of Nibiru, then you could use that point in time to say, okay, it passed here. Let's add another 3,600 years, 3,600, and see when's it going to come by again. That's the whole idea. Mm. So the reason the Sumerian Kings list is important is because it lists at the end of the first rulership, and it took 240,400 years. This is table 1 from the document I wrote. Then the flood swept over. And then the next document picks up for the Sumerian Kings list and says, after the flood. So it's talking about a great flood that happened. Now, the question is that Noah's flood? Because we know from Solon, when he went to the city of Sais in Egypt to find out about the history of the Greek people, and in particular about Atlantis, they told him there were multiple floods, 4 major ones and multiple minor ones. Mm-hmm. So what I was trying to do with this first point was using the dates of the rulership, could we land at Noah's flood, which I believe personally was at the end of the last ice age. So I think it was about 10,000 BC, personally. Some people believe it was 2,900 BC. So this is where it comes down to, is if you could pinpoint that, and you believe the assumption that it was caused by Nibiru, you'd have a passage point in history. Okay, this is one of the angles I tried to come at it from. And I did multiple angles, as any scientist would, to try to get to the truth here. And that's what's going to come out tonight, hopefully. And I was actually surprised at the outcome. So I'm actually very pleased, just to let you know up front. Now, so I followed this. So what did I do? I said, well, Enki says he landed here between 450,000 years ago, according to Sitchin's timetable. And in some of the other sources, it could have been earlier, as early as 360,000 years ago. So I took the conservative one, 360,000 years, subtracted 240,400 from the first rulers from the Sumerian Kings list that ended with Ubaro Tutu. And I came up with, what did I come up with? 119,000, something like that. So it was 119,600 years. So I looked at that and said, well, that may have been a flood, but it certainly wasn't the 10,000 BCE. So I thought that was a dead end. Mm-hmm. Okay. So the thing that was in question there was, what was the actual date to use from Enki's arrival in order to start from prehistory and go forward to the flood. All right. So that was the first attempt. The next attempt was to go, okay, well, let's go after the flood, find the Sumerian king, because we have all their reigns, so we have the time that we could accumulate. Find a Sumerian king that was documented to be in the record so that we had a firm date in stone that he was actually a ruler there, and then work backwards to see what that time was for the flood. So I did that as well. And their total rulership for all the way to the point where they switched cities was 17,980 years, and that ended with Aga of Kish. Okay. So just prior to him was Enmebarajsi, and he served for 900 years. And according to this, he was the earliest ruler on the list that was confirmed independently from epigraphical sources. So I thought, okay, well, let's start from him, work backwards to the flood date that was given at the end of the first part of the King's list, and see where that landed us. So you just take 2,600 and start adding these dates of these previous rulers. So add 2600 to about 16,000, and all of a sudden you see again you're not close to the 2900 BCE flood that they claim, and also the one that we think happened at the end of the last ice age. Mm-hmm. So this is the problem with that approach, and so I found that as a dead end as well. From a scientific standpoint, it doesn't hold water.
Sure.
But they said there was a great flood there. So it looks like if you work backwards, and just using the last king on the list, that was 17,980 years. Let's call it 18,000 plus 2,600. So that would be almost 20,000 BC, which is way longer than the one that we were trying to work to. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. So I really didn't. It really didn't help me that much. Now it says that in 2900 BCE, they did find a sediment layer all the way up to an area. I think it was Sapar. No, it was. They found localized flooding at Shurupak and other layers that they found, and they radiocarbon dated it to 2900 BC. But this could have been one of the minor floods too. So it doesn't really, it's not convincing to me.
I just read an article before I did the show, actually for a multitude of different reasons. I was doing Irish mythology, and there is a sunken, not a sunken city, there's a buried city on the west coast of Ireland that's been buried with flood deposit. It's some sort of a black mud or flood layer. Purported to be about 4,000 BC, Gerald. It looks like there was a tsunami came in of some sort and hit the west of Ireland and buried a settlement there.
Another piece of evidence I had from way back in history, it just came to me. When I was going back and forth to Turkey, I remember them finding this vessel in the Sea of Marmara that apparently had been washed there from a flood that came in through the north from the Black Sea that spilled over the Strait of Bosphorus and washed this vessel down into the bottom of the ocean there. And they also found a bunch of farmhouses at the bottom of the Black Sea. Maybe the thing never made it over the Strait of Bosphorus, but it was at the bottom of the sea, the Black Sea or the Sea of Marmara. And they dated when they thought this event happened, and it turned out to be approximately 10,000 BCE, which was, about 10,000 years ago, which was about 12,000 BCE. And it turned out to be, at the end of the last ice age. So a lot of evidence shows that a lot of the waters all around the Mediterranean rose, a significant portion around that same time. So I think that was the flood of Noah. And there's been multiple ones though. So this planet is flood prone.
Sure. It's an important line of inquiry for Nibiru though, Gerald. I get why you started off like that, right. Because if Nibiru is coming close to us, we're going to get flood activity. It depends how close it crosses though. If it's a planet after crossing, which is what it's described as, it depends how close it gets to us, Gerald. There's sometimes it comes past us in the orbit and it doesn't affect us that much though, Gerald. Is that correct?
That's right. It really just depends on whether where the Earth is when it causes its disturbances with the sun. And, so if it's whether it's on the leeward or the windward side, essentially,
Sure.
So if you're on the downwind side where the radiation can come off the sun and strike the Earth due to its interactions with Nibiru, then that's a real problem. So, on top of that, I guess one of the worst problems is the magnetic effect in causing the planet to wobble about its polar orbit, mm-hmm. which would cause great disturbances on a watery planet. And that seems to be the ongoing historical record, flood after flood after flood, whether it's a major or minor one. So it really is a function of, like you said, where Nibiru is when it comes through.
Now, is there anything in the chronology, it's a vital line of research, Gerald, for these Nibiru passings. Is there anything in the chronology that we can say is a definite?
Well, I thought I had some definite points from my Sumerian readings before, and I was glomming on to 3760 BCE because it seemed like a very important one. I was going to go and look up the story that was connected to that to see if it had any legs, and I didn't get around to looking back at that one. But I thought, well, let me just put it in an Excel spreadsheet, assume that is the date, and start working it forward and see if it corroborates with anything else. And it really did not. It did not corroborate well with the Ice Age. end of the last ice age, or with changes we've been seeing. So I didn't get a good feel from that. Now Sitchin did the same thing. I think he was about 1,000 years off from 3760. He was closer to 4700 BCE. He thought it crossed. Well, when I did the math on that one, it still was, 2,000 years away, or 200 years away before it actually would affect us if that was true.
Mm-hmm.
So that didn't jive with some of the other evidence that we had that we're going to talk about a little bit later. So hopefully, if somebody had a true orbital table from the past and said definitively, here is a crossing that Nibiru came through, the whole thing would be solved. You could easily look at the periodicity of the planet, even if it's plus or minus some number of years. On average, it would come around about the same time.
Sure.
So,
let's get into the Enuma Elish.
Here's one thing we do know. It's been, from our recorded history from, since the biblical times, we have not seen the kind of destruction that was assigned to this destroyer planet in Revelations called Wormwood, that apparently drug meteors down on the earth and all the other destructive things that is described in Revelations that is affiliated with this planet.
Mm-hmm.
So we haven't seen that. So here we've gone, 2015 years or so and not seen it. So in the best case, we're not going to see it for another 1,045 years.
Best case scenario.
In the worst case, it actually transited within that time period previous to the biblical times, about 1500 BCE or so. Now, if that's true, then it's due right now. Okay? So I did a table in the document to play around with those kind of thoughts to see, what corroborates here.
See the extremes of the situation.
Exactly. So for me, finding a fixed point in the past where it transited, I'm going to scour the Sumerian records one more time and see if I can come up with something. But I thought I had one before at 3760 BC, but it doesn't fit.
Sure. Gerald, let's go to the Enuma Elish. Let's talk about what we do now. Let's go into the solar system creation account. This is incredibly sophisticated and telling about the Nibiru planet system.
Yeah, when I first read this, it was kind of mishmash to me, and it was very long too, about 11 tablets. And then I thought, the only way to make sense of this is to sit down and correlate what their planet names are with our own. And once I did that, and then found out a little bit more about who the players were that were pretending to be these, it started out as this family relationship that had offspring that became planets that turned into a celestial battle. And some key names showed up in there, by the way. Enki's name, he was called Ea or Nudimmud. He showed up in there. His son Nigshita was referred to as Mumu there and was affiliated with the planet Mercury.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, the short story of the Babylonian epic of creation is, it appears that Nibiru and its satellites, moons, maybe even had its own sun, we don't know, was in an adjacent galaxy, is what it appears to have happened. Somehow, through the meandering through the galactic center, is my hypothesis, they got dislodged. At least their small portion did with their satellites, and it looks like there's up to 5 planets in the Nibiru constellation. Got dislodged and ended up, according to this allegorical battle in the Enuma Elish, getting trapped into our solar system orbit, in a retrograde orbit. Okay? So that's why it came in from the outside of Pluto. Well, in their account, they start talking about the different effects that the inner planets in the solar system are going to have relative to their satellites, and this is where the battle part comes in, because what if there's a collision? What if this one gets tugged on here and causes this? So they go through this whole account, very scientific if you understand now what it is they were talking about, that they did things to the planets in the inner orbit in order to avert collisions, including blowing a few things up and redirecting or masking the radiance or the radiation from a couple of planets like the sun. Very, very intense, very advanced scientific understanding in this. So anyway, in the first pass through, one of their satellites had some problems. There was an existing planet they called Tiamat that sits approximately where the Earth is now. And through the perihelion transit, they describe all these actions they did. The second time through, though, there was a collision with one of their satellites with Tiamat. Mm-hmm. And this is what formed half of it formed the Earth, part of it formed Kingu, the moon, which is our moon. And the debris from that formed what they called the hammered bracelet, which is our asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. So it's a very detailed account. And, like I said, this was the document that was read in Babylon every spring under the auspices of Marduk, who was their chief deity, right? And, in that document, he had renamed Nibiru to Marduk. Mm-hmm. And they called it the planet of crossing. Well, so we find out that it's in a retrograde orbit, and that where it crosses either the solar ecliptic or the point at perihelion was what made it famous as this planet of crossing, because apparently it reshines or re-resonates or radiates the radiation from the sun. It's a very large planet. According to the data we're going to get into, it's 4 times larger than Jupiter. Now think about this. It had to be larger than Jupiter in order to cause Jupiter and Neptune and Uranus to end up with these tilts in their orbit. Mm-hmm. It had to be a very large planet for that to happen. So now, as you'll see, it looks to be about 17 times bigger than the Earth and about 4 times bigger than Jupiter. So with that said, its magnetic effect, its pull on the Earth would be quite significant were it to come within some close proximity. And so that could explain a lot of the past pole shifts, the change in our magnetic flux that's happening on the Earth now. Mm-hmm. It's been moving significantly. And so something is causing that. So I postulated to you earlier, and I didn't really put this in here, that, we were also told by the Mayans that we'd be going through the galactic center about 2011, 2013, somewhere in there. Okay, some people think it was winter solstice 2012, and Ian Lungold said no, it was October 2011. So if that was the case, it could explain adjacent planets warming up. It could potentially explain the gravitational North Pole changing, and a lot of the other Earth changes we're seeing. Mm-hmm. At the same time, if my hypothesis was true in the first place, that the great year, this passage through the galactic center, could be the disturbance force that caused Nibiru's constellation to get caught up in our solar system in the first place. Well, if that is the case, then those two events would be correlated. So this Mayan prediction and Nibiru's return could be correlated because of that reason.
Sure. Yeah. We're talking something like, when we say a planet, it's most likely something like a failed second sun, Gerald. Is it safe to say that? Is that probably the best guess we've got at the moment? It's like a failed second sun, like a red dwarf or brown dwarf that's got satellite planets. Use
whatever term you want. Its effect on light is what's important because of its ability to be observed. And according to Dr. Harrington and Dr. Neugebauer, who was from JPL, and this is in the 1980, early 81 or so, they were discussing the infrared satellite settings that would be needed to detect this planet. And they said something very telling. They said that the planet is so cold that they had to, unless you had an instrument that could be cooled to -20 degrees above, minus 425 degrees Fahrenheit, mm-hmm. that you would not be able to detect it. So you've got to super cool your instrument in order to detect this thing because it's not reflecting light. It's in the infrared. Okay, so is that a failed star? I don't know. It could still have magma inside it, but the surface of the planet is very cold.
Sure. Yeah, I know. Giorgio de Santillano in Hamlet's Mill talks about Neugebauer's data as well. He gets into a lot of the astronomical stuff as well. There is no doubt, though, that the amount of context we have for this Nibiru in historical text, though, Gerald, and I want to focus a little bit on this. This is very important. We get into some of the science and the astronomy in a bit. But, the amount of times we have this Nibiru planet mentioned, either Nibiru or Marduk, the way that you describe it, there is nothing else that can fit this other than a planet, Gerald. I mean, it's not a star, because a star just doesn't do what this thing is supposed to do. Yes, it does reflect a lot of light because of the nature of it, of what it is and how it comes into our solar system. But there's only one thing that fits this, and that's like a planet with a very long oval trajectory. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, you go all the way back to the late 1700s. There were the first people that were using telescopes that were searching for whatever. They hadn't even found Pluto yet, okay? We didn't find Pluto until the 1930s. These guys were focused on what is disturbing the outer planets. A real physical, tangible question. What is so large that disturbed them off of the solar ecliptic? They wanted to know, and it's still a valid question today. Okay, something tangible that had a interactive effect, either collision or a magnetic or gravitational effect, changed the orbit of these very massive planets. Mm-hmm. And that has been a search for the astronomical community for a very long time. And it turns out that Tombaugh, who was working for, who was he? I think he was with the IRAs. I think he was with the IRAs program too. Mm-hmm. Or I can't remember where he's from, but he actually got accredited with finding Pluto in the 1930s, but it was by accident. They were actually looking for what this big object was that could have affected our outer giants, planetary giants.
Sure. Wow, incredible, Gerald. Gerald, I mean, let's get into Sitchin, in-step Sitchin in 76. He brings in this incredible tablet, this imprint of a cylinder seal, the famous photograph, but it's a photograph of a cylinder seal. It's in the Berlin Museum. It's known as VA243. Not a very illustrious name, Gerald, but
very controversial.
Yeah. VA243, probably the most controversial cylinder seal in existence. You know I love cylinder seals, Gerald. So
I know. I actually put this in the document because I knew how much you love cylinder seals, and I had some fun. I had a little bit of fun with this one.
But I like your analysis, though, Gerald. I like your analysis. Now I'm going to again refer the audience to the book or the document, the article that you wrote in the YouTube description. And get a copy of this because it's got all the pictures, tables, data, and the analysis all there. Very, very thorough document, Gerald. But I'll be honest. I mean, I just looked at this as just a pure picture, and it's only when I see the analysis that you've done, Gerald, with the relative sizes of there's a lot of criticism of this, but the criticism, Gerald, that you have seems to have dispelled here for me. I mean, it's great because it seems like a no-brainer. It's showing relative sizes, Gerald, and it looks like it is actually Nibiru in the center. I mean, it doesn't look like it's a star, or a sun, or it's a star.
Yeah, well, so I'll give a little background. So this very controversial cylinder seal, and I know how difficult it must have been to etch this thing on stone and roll this thing out. Now that you look at the detail, and anyway, in between two of the beings on the top left, it looks like a primitive worker is being led by the hand and introduced to an Anunnaki deity that's seated with a plow. And I'll have to go and decode the cuneiform that's on there. It's not hard. We have a cuneiform script and a dictionary now, so anybody can do it. And I'll look at see what some of the words say on here. But just looking at it from the historical record, it was interesting to me because, number one, it shows a circle with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 7 points around it. Okay, and the Anunnaki oftentimes used a star symbol to represent different planets.
Mm-hmm.
So a 7-pointed star would refer to the Earth, 6-pointed to Mars, and from there, Enuma Elish, that we assign numbers to the planets based on working from the outside in, from Pluto inward, and then theirs ending up as the 12th planet because they were the last ones in. So that's how we ended up calling the Earth the 7th planet. Okay.
Sure.
So anyway, so this cylinder seal that Sitchin was so focused on had in between this primitive worker and this liaison that was going to introduce him to his enslaved role as a farmer working with the plow. Right in between them was this star-looking symbol, a very large circular dot in between, and then several other dots around them that looked like planets around an orbit, okay, around a sun, around a central sun, just like our solar system. And so it turns out that Sitchin was very excited about that because there weren't just 9 planets, there were 10. So he believed that they were talking about an additional planet in our solar system that we hadn't accounted for, even in the 1930s when we found Pluto. Okay? So on the cylinder seal, it became controversial as to using it as a source, whether there was another planet out there or not. Okay? So he wrote about this in the 12th planet. This controversy, kind of came to a head, even more so after his death. But basically, what can we take these dots or these circles and this central sun-looking picture to mean? Could it be representational of a chronology in time when the plow was given to mankind? So it's commemorating some ephemeris. If you were to look at those as, well, are these the planets and the zodiacal houses are in at the time? Is this a time marker to commemorate this event? Or is it a indication of where the Earth was at the time when the event, just the Earth itself, because it's got a sun with 7 points on it. Mm-hmm. So that means it's pretty specific to the radiation that's hitting the 7th planet to me. Not that it's the 7th planet. Okay? Because it's shown much larger than the other spheres. So all of a sudden you go, well, why are the circles different sizes? Mm-hmm. And so this kind of led to a lot of questions, and a lot of people have attacked the theory of Nibiru even existing just simply based on this single piece of evidence, which I think is absurd. But some people have done it. Okay. So I decided to, take another look at this and see if there's anything else we could glean from what they were saying on this seal. See, is that. Now, there's a historical story that came from some of Sitchin's writings and others, that even in the Cain and Abel story from the Sumerians, we had Anunnaki siblings from the Enkiite and Enlilite clan interacting with them. For instance, according to the story, Abel, the son of Adam, there was Cain and Abel. Well, Abel was taught to do farming by Ninurta, which was Enlil's son. The warrior Ninurta was also known as Apollo. Well, the Cain portion, the Cain offspring was taught herdsmanship and cattle management by none other than Marduk. And then you have the biblical story of Cain and Abel, and Cain killing Abel with a stone because he didn't receive the same praise from Enki that Cain did for meat production. Okay, mm-hmm. So it was kind of a very crazy story and a very crazy tie-in with the Anunnaki. So I thought, well, let's look at these orbs on here and see if, knowing that you studied cylinder seals and they are very precise. I mean, just crazy precise. How they could even do this in the first place? So would they have haphazardly drawn these on here, and can it tell us anything? So I started looking into that. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I glommed onto someone else's research who had, and this is shown in Figure 3, VA 243, planet numbering. Basically, starting from the smallest circle on that blown up picture from VA 243 and assigning numbers to it. you'll end up with 1 through 12. Okay.
Sure.
And the smallest one probably being Pluto, since we know it's the smallest planet, and then the largest one being the Sun. Okay, which turns out to be right in the. And all the other planets orbit the Sun anyway, so it kind of makes sense to make that assumption. No matter whether there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 points on this central Sun, which is making it look like a star, which is interesting. Okay, so numbering them that way, and then putting them into a table, and then going to the detail log from the ephemeris and looking up their actual diameters in kilometers. That's what is shown in Figure 4. Okay. Now, somebody took it upon themselves to take this picture and blow it up, and then actually measure the pixel sizes across each of these spheres, these two-dimensional circles representing spheres, and then put them in a table as well, and see if they correlated with the actual diameters in kilometers of our planets. Of course, now think about this problem. You got a huge constellation of, or our solar system that you're trying to represent in a very small space. How do you do that? How do you do that such that the planets even show up? Because if that was the case and you had to show the Sun and actually show Pluto on there, you'll get the Sun, but then you wouldn't get many of the other planets because they're so small. You'd have to show them like little tiny dots. You understand what I'm saying?
Don't they have this problem?
There's a scaling problem.
Yeah,
okay?
Don't they have this problem printing astronomy books as well, Gerald? They represent the solar system in a different scale to what it actually is, so that they can actually make it more easy to interpret for the reader or the viewer.
Yeah, it's like a geometrical transform.
Yeah,
is what you're doing. Okay, so that you can spatially still show them correctly, even though you have to go through the transform to make them show back up the way they should be. Understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So anyway, I went through some of this research, and I thought, okay, well let me follow this through. So the basic idea is to find and see if the size of these circles on VA 243 have any correlation whatsoever to the actual planet sizes in our constellation, so that you could say these are stars or these are planets or just what, right? Let's use math. So in doing that, I'm going to skip forward to what I call Figure 6, where I decided to play a couple of games, because in order for them to make those planets show up in any kind of geometric transform, they would have had to use a logarithmic scale. There's no way you could use a linear scale and get them in that small space. And it is not so much the space as it is their size relative to each other, so that you could still see them all. You with me?
Yeah, sure.
And have them still be scalable.
Log scaling is something we use all the time, John.
So I went through a logarithmic scaling to look at the actual diameter in kilometers and the actual diameter in pixels. Okay. And of course the pixel size is very different relative to something in kilometers. So what you do with something like that is you look for a way to do a transform and see if there's a correlation for every point using the same transform, not a different transform. Okay. Mm-hmm. So you can go back and forth between data sets. Well, that's what I did. So I decided to use a little Anunnaki trick and use a kind of a sexagesimal logarithmic, not a base 10, and take the log base 66 of the diameter of the actual planets, and then compare that with the log base 6 of the smaller representation of the pixels that had to be placed on the cylinder seal. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, when I did that, well, first of all, I just took the pixel diameter and see if it correlated with the diameter of the planets from Pluto all the way to the Sun. Okay. And they're ordered in that order from smallest to largest. Okay. So when I did that, I ended up with a correlation of 89.98%. Not very good. Okay. It's okay. It's better than average, but still it's not enough to convince me that, okay, those dots, on the cylinder seal correspond to the actual planets in our system. But when you compare the log base 66 of the diameter in kilometers with the log base 6 of the pixel size, you get a 99.503% correlation. So what I'm telling you is those dots were not arbitrarily sized on VA243. They were intentionally scaled logarithmically to represent all the planets that are in our solar system.
You couldn't ask for that accuracy, Gerald.
Including theirs.
You really couldn't ask for accuracy that good. I mean, you couldn't. To get a 99.5% accuracy correlation is beautiful. It's almost exact. It's actually within, scientific measurements, like, to allow a plus or minus 5.5%.
Well, whoever was chiseling that little seal, they probably got to that point and they said, that's probably good enough for the girls we run around with. I don't know, but
for sure.
It's very... Now, the other thing that brings up is if they spent that much time making sure the sizes corresponded to each other relative to actual planet size, like I said, the other next analysis is do the locations now map to zodiacal houses in the ecliptic that correspond to a time in the past history that this event occurred. That makes sense to me. Why else would you put it there?
Sure.
Right? So anyway, it turned out to be, I don't know, I think it turned out to be a victory for Sitchin and a loss for his critics, because the reality is, what he said about it is it does represent our solar system, and it does include a 10th planet, which they, in their documents, call it Marduk from the old Babylonian version, and they call it Nibiru in that Hamlet Mill document, and other Akkadian documents as well. But I've been trying to find a good one that I could use, and I couldn't find a good reference. So I was happy to see that from the Hamlet Mill, that over and over and over again, everywhere where Marduk's name had replaced the planetary name, it was Nibiru.
Incredible. This is the relative sizes and the distances, Gerald. They're just the proportions. It's all, and positions. It's all beautiful. It's all beautiful. The more I look at it now with the analysis that you done, Gerald, the more it makes sense to me. It's clearly.
Well, I figured if anybody got it, you would, being an expert on cylinder seals. Yeah. So I thought, who better to share this thought with than you?
Here's the thing, Gerald. Here's the thing. If that picture wasn't on a cylinder seal, if that picture drawing a representation of the solar system that we're purporting, right? If that was done on a piece of paper, you could say that they put that randomly there somewhere. But to get it onto a cylinder seal that accurate, I mean, they knew exactly what they're doing. That wasn't by chance, Gerald. Not on the cylinder seal. You could say that. You could say that on a flat piece of paper or something. Not on that something that accurate, that position.
Well, it's and it's not huge in the first place. I mean, just think about the precision that had to go into that. Mm-hmm. It's amazing, actually.
Mm-hmm. I could talk cylinder seals all day, and I'll point.
I know you can, and I was never that, I don't know, drawn to them. But the more I see what the absolute technology and precision they put into those things, I mean, it just blows you away.
Just for the listeners, I showed Gerald a picture of a cylinder seal from the British Museum during the week there, made out of rock crystal, 9 out of 10 on the Mohs scale, showing the anatomy of animals sitting down with their legs bent, and you can see the muscles on the legs and how they bend their legs. And to draw any anatomy, whether it's human or animal anatomy, is incredibly hard to do in artistic expression, and especially hard to do in 3 dimensions, or embossing it into reverse embossing it into a piece of crystal. I mean, you need to cut that thing with diamond or crystal. It's incredibly sophisticated accuracy, down to millimeters of depth, so that it's imprinted into clay when it's rolled out. These guys could do it, Gerald. I mean, you see the example.
Well, it's impressive that not only did they do it in a reverse imprint, so you had to put ditches where the mounds were going to show up, but they did it in reverse. I mean, that's that's incredibly difficult.
Sophisticated. Yeah. VA243, I'll let the listeners look that up in Google Images. You'll see the famed picture, and the analysis of this, Gerald, now, from what I've seen in your document, it's wonderful. It's wonderful to see that. It gives us a good foundation. Nibiru is real. Nibiru's there, and it's done to scale as well. I just want to mention John Matisse and Daniel Whitmire. I mean, these guys have suggested in '99 that there was a Planet X type body in the Earth cloud. And the bit that gets me, Gerald, is that these guys mention this thing as if it's something totally new. It's just this new idea, you know. These guys, being astronomers, must be aware of Stitch's work. They must be aware of the existing Planet X mystery, the existing Nibiru case that's out there in the public domain. Of course, every astronomer out there is aware of this. They may not talk about it, but to come up with a Planet X as if it's just a new idea. But again, they've recently said that it's out there and it's a failed second sun, and it's like people, I don't even know whether this stuff is disinformation or is it to take the eyes off the real Planet X Nibiru. But what's your thoughts on that, Gerald? It's pretty sure that there's something else. There's something else tugging on the planets. Like we know that.
Yeah, I remember seeing their research, and it actually ended up on a documentary, I believe, in about 1999. And it was a retelling of the same stuff that had gone on with Sitchin and Harrington prior, but maybe because of the political environment, they were trying to rediscover it, reintroduce it under some other name, perhaps, or other venues, so that it was disambiguated from the past. I don't know what their motivation was, to pretend like it had never been discussed before.
Yeah,
they may have had maybe they had to do that for funding reasons. I don't know.
Yeah, it's got a good point, Gerald. Maybe they did it for funding reasons, but I mean, there may be large icy bodies out there, but I don't think the failed second sun's out there in the Oort cloud. I think, I definitely think there's something tugging on the planets. We mathematically know it. Just for the listeners that are new to the Nibiru scenario, it's mathematically known that there's something tugging on the outer planets. There's something there, and it's not Pluto, because Pluto hasn't got the mass to do it. We know that. We know that mathematically. That's how they find these planets. They mathematically know.
Well, not only was it tugging on them, but it tugged on them so hard that they're displaced in their orbit. That's a point I want to re-emphasize. Okay, they got tugged on so hard, at least at one point, where their orbits are changed and they've never gone back. Okay, so this is a significant issue. It's like, and I'm sure we're going to get to it in just a minute when we talk about that, but it's not just a tugging. Okay, it's a real physical planar change.
It's dislodging them. It's totally dislodging them.
Yes.
Wow.
Now, and I'll reiterate, whatever it is, it couldn't have been Pluto, because it had to be so large to dislodge a planet that had to be smaller than it was. Okay, so whatever it came through, it had to be larger than Neptune and Uranus in order to have that happen. That means it's very large.
I mean, Neptune and Uranus are big planets. I mean, this thing.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are.
If you're gonna dislodge them, you got a seriously big body out there, Gerald.
Yeah, just from a sizing standpoint, just real quick. The sun is 1,392,684 kilometers in diameter. Nibiru is shown at 226,973. And Jupiter, the next biggest planet, is at 142,984. So Nibiru is bigger than Jupiter, and it's bigger than Saturn, that's sitting at 120,536. Okay, so basically Nibiru looks like about 17 times bigger than the Earth, and it's more than 2 times bigger than Jupiter. Actually, it looks like almost 3 times bigger than Jupiter.
Sure.
Yeah. So it's a big planet.
I mean, people aren't living on Nibiru. It's probably the satellite moons that they're living on, though, Gerald. Is that correct?
Probably. Actually, they're probably on various planets throughout the solar system and other galaxies, doing the same thing, gathering resources and occupying the place, just like they did the planet Earth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about Harrington. This is for me where the astronomy comes in now, Gerald. There's original analysis done by Harrington. We might even be able to expand on that later in the show, but let's talk about what we know about Harrington first, the Harrington background, and of course the famous IRAS satellite.
Okay, well, I'll try to do this from memory. I have his video on my website where he met with Zecharia Sitchin in August of 1991, I believe it was. I'll have to look at. Let me look just real quick and see if that's the date. August 30th, 1990. Harrington met with Sitchin Washington, D.C. Now, he's the supervising astronomer of the United States Naval Observatory. Okay, he's a top dude, okay? So here, apparently, according to him, in this video, he says about 1978 time frame, and Sitchin wrote his book, 12th Planet, in 1976, and somehow Harrington got a copy of it, and had read the Enuma Elish closely, understanding that it appears in their celestial battle account that there was an intruder planet at the edge of our solar system, and in his mind he was, that's what disturbed Neptune, Uranus, and blah blah blah, right? The hidden mystery planet that was large enough that could do this. This is what he was looking for, just like all these guys were. Okay? Mm-hmm. So this was about 1978 time frame. Now, he says after meeting with Sitchin, looking at his orbital chart, they basically conferred, nodded, and said, yeah, that's the same planet that you've talked about in your 12th planet that we're looking for. And instead of where you've got your orbital diagram drawn in these zodiacal houses, if you take into account the precession that's happened since biblical times, it would be right here. And he showed him a diagram, and I put that in the document, okay? Now, I didn't think much about that document, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what I did with it in just a second. So Harrington took some action based on this information that he corroborated with Sitchin, and he said 6 months after he had gotten this information in his head, he had actually commissioned Voyager 1, Voyager 2, and then Pioneer 10 and 11. So Pioneer 10, if you see this diagram that he showed in his orbital chart when they were discussing, Pioneer 10 was positioned at the perihelion point to see any planet that came in around the sun on the backside where the Earth might be shielded from it, or couldn't see it because of the brightness of the sun. Pioneer 11 was placed at the location that Harrington believed Nibiru would be coming in its retrograde orbit from the south. And he split the orbital pattern with Pioneer 11. So it was looking in a way where it could see it coming or going. But with Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, he put those at the aphelion and perihelion inbound and outbound locations exactly on the zodiacal house, one looking out and one looking in. So it's very, very telling about where they were putting these instruments and what they were looking for. Okay, and this shows up on the diagram, and I think that's so interesting. So, what else could we tell from this interaction with these two? Well, according to the diagram, Harrington had shown the location of Nibiru, and so had Sitchin, and they'd just drawn a circle on this orbital chart. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, they had not used the logarithmic scaling like the Anunnaki had done on their cylinder seal, and instead of drawing the planets in their orbits around the sun on this chart, they had just drawn circular spherical two-dimensional paths around it to indicate where the planet would be, but not the size of the planet, so you could do a comparison. Sure. Okay? Sure. So I was going to play that same trick with their diagram as we did with the cylinder seal, but I couldn't do it. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so the only planet they showed in a circle in 2 dimensions was Nibiru. And it was shown just outside of Pluto. Okay? Just outside it. Not a huge distance away. So I thought, well, I wonder if that's the scale. And I'll show you what I did with that in a little while. Anyway, so let's go forward with Harrington's story just a little bit farther. So this was circa 1978. They send their probes out, blah, blah, blah. And he didn't meet with Sitchin until 1990, which I found very interesting. Several years after he'd read this book.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here it is, 1990. The guy's the supervising astronomer at the U.S. Naval Observatory, and he's making a video with an alternative cosmogony guy like Sitchin, and somehow the government's allowing it. I don't understand that. But that's crazy. Think about that happening now. Right?
It's incredible that they're using Pioneer and Voyager and the IRA satellite, Gerald, to look for this Planet X. And, you know, still, there's silence from NASA. science.
Yeah. So in my figure 9 in this document, I showed the viewing range, or the field of view for Pioneer 11 and Voyager 2, and it doesn't show Pioneer 10, Voyager 1, because it's a little bit out of the scene. But you can see on that particular one, he's in Sagittarius and Scorpio, which is exactly, if you look, actually this was the prediction from Bill Broussard, was Sagittarius and Scorpio, where those two ended up. Mm-hmm. He had Voyager 2 on the outbound path for Nibiru, according to Sitchin's chart, which turned out to be close enough to the inbound path for Broussard's, or the next precession of the equinox into a zodiacal house from biblical times, about 2,000 years, so that he could hedge his bet. So basically they hedged their bet on whether it was in the next zodiacal house or the one after it, and how they placed their probes. So you can clearly see Harrington's hand here, just as he said, in going out and taking definitive action to find this thing. So, yeah. So what do we know? In 1981, the first article came out. Are we ready to talk about that? Or actually, well, let's talk a little bit more about Harrington. No, let's do this, and then we'll go back to Harrington, because in 1991 was the next big event. So in 1981, the first article showed up in the newspaper talking about this 10th planet. And this was in the Detroit News, January 16th, 1981.
Sure.
So it says 10th planet, Pluto orbit, says yes. Okay, well, it wasn't just Pluto's orbit, but it was Neptune. It was the big planets as well.
Yeah.
So I tried to read this article, but I couldn't find a legible version of it online. Are you with me?
Yeah, I must still be in like the libraries and the archives there.
Oh, sure. So anyway, I did find another article. There were several other articles that came out in the same year. So there was another one that came out in the New York Times, January 30th, 1981, where they're talking about Harrington and Planet X. And in this one, there was something that was legible that I could see, that I kind of focused in on. And then the Washington Post one with Thomas O'Toole was even better. And it came out 2 years later, 1983. Well, anyway, in 1981, the New York Times, Harrington states that he thinks Planet X is 5 billion miles outside of Pluto's orbit. And that must be at the time that he was looking. So 1981.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we know that Pluto's distance is about 3.6 billion years from the sun. So, you're talking about, if you add those together, that's about 8.67 billion years at that point, away from the sun at that point in 1981. That's what he's saying. So then all of a sudden you get excited as an engineer and go, oh, distance equals rate times time. Maybe I could figure out how fast it was traveling. When's it going to be here? That's what everybody wants to know, right?
Yeah, at least
anyway,
we got some data.
So that stuck in my mind, though, that he had assigned a distance to it. That means from this IRAS data that they gathered, he thought it was 5 billion miles. Okay, now in this next article, the Washington Post, by Thomas O'Toole, the next major character shows up that I think is very important to this story, and his name's Dr. Jerry Neubauer, and he was the IRAS chief scientist for California's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and he was the director of the Palomar Observatory for Caltech, where my kids in college there. Okay, so he's an important dude. He's got his fingers on the data from the IRAS satellite, the one that had to be super cooled, right, to detect this thing. So he shows up in this article, and he's almost like he's in disagreement with Harrington. And it's interesting because he says he thinks it's 50 billion miles away, not 5 billion outside of Pluto. Okay, so there's contradiction number one. Okay, and additionally, he stated that he was trying to douse any fears by saying that it's not inbound. Okay, but at the same time, one of the other scientists said that even if it's 50 billion miles that close to the Earth, then it's part of our solar system. Is what he was saying.
Sure.
So this was a guy named James Houck from Cornell University. Okay, so these are serious scientists talking about this. This is not conspiracy theory stuff. This is just pure scientific data from the IRAS satellite in 1981. Okay. Now, what's interesting is they were clever enough to say, well, is it moving or not? So in order to do that, you've got to take two measurements. And they call it the blink method, right? You take one and wait some period of known time, and take another one, and then come up with the delta x, and the delta time, and you can come up with the speed, change in x over change in time.
Sure.
Okay, so apparently Harrington waited 6 months after his first measurement to take a picture of this from the IRAS. Okay, so they had a really good blink. Okay, and this is where Neugebauer comes up and says it's 50 billion miles away, and talks about all the super cooling they had to do to get the picture. And then he says something very significant. He says it's not incoming. Neugebauer said, "I want to douse that idea with as much cold water as I can." Now, why would he say such a thing if they had just taken the blink method of it, but didn't discuss anything about the data? That's very curious to me.
So it's murky. It's very, very murky to do that.
Yeah. So I don't know what role this guy was playing. He almost seems to have been playing a little bit of a disinformation role. Whoever this guy was put in a position to have access to this data directly from the IRAS scope. Okay, but the bottom line is none of them disagreed that they had found something very large. What appears to be in disagreement is how far away it was, and whether it was moving, right? Mm-hmm. So that got left out of the article. But the next link I found as I was starting to look at articles, I had no idea how many articles have been published on Planet X Nibiru. By the way, I gave you a link on this in this section. It's on page 25.
Sure.
It goes all the way back to the 50s, and there are hundreds of articles, not just 5 or 6. There are hundreds of articles.
I got through a couple, Gerald. I got through a couple. There's so many. I mean, it's mind-blowing.
There's so many. So the idea that there's something tangible at the end of the universe that's disturbing big planets is so physical and believable to people that it's been a focal point for investigation for a very long time. Okay, it's not new. Okay, so I wanted to finish up with that. Now, so we got to 1981. There were several more articles. Almost every year you see in that link that I gave you, talking about Planet X updates. Well, it turned out there was some real disinformation going on in the year 1991. But it turns out that was the year also, right after Harrington had done this interview with Sitchin. Apparently he went off to this place in New Zealand that we looked up. Do you remember where that was in New Zealand?
Black Birch, I think it was.
Right. So he took an 8-inch telescope there on his own to go see if he could actually get personal images using the blink method, like we were describing here, 2 different measurements at different times, and then seeing if it had moved and how fast it was moving. Well, let's think about that for just a second. Number one, he was so convinced by the IRAS data that this thing is inbound and that it's within the distance that he could see it from the southern hemisphere, or looking from New Zealand south. He believed it was in the constellation Libra, coming in near Cassiopeia. Mm-hmm. Okay, so in the diagram I showed Google Earth where that was. Okay, so it coincides with this southern path that Harrington believed in as well, but he added his precessional updates to make it more accurate. And Sitchin did not disagree with him, by the way, when mm-hmm. he said that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so here he is in New Zealand, and I don't have the article in front of me, but he went there to get data, and he was due back to release this data at a conference in the United States when he came back. Well, apparently he never came back and died suddenly of throat cancer there in New Zealand with his 8-inch scope. Now think about that. The just audacity of a cancer killing somebody that quickly, getting on an airplane, going over there, not talking about, being a victim of cancer or anything, and all of a sudden just dying from it within a short period. I just don't buy it. I don't buy it. So, very, very, very significant red flags in the demise of Harrington and what he was doing relative to this planet that had been discovered. Mm-hmm. Listen, he was the supervising astronomer. He came back with his personal data that probably got absconded with through whatever forces were controlling the IRS data directly. Mm-hmm. It looks like he was headed off the path and he was not allowed to share that. But what I want you to take away from that is if he was able to take an 8-inch scope and potentially see it inbound to the point where it goes into perihelion with the sun, where it basically goes behind the sun, you can't see it. If he was able, in his belief that he could go someplace and look south and see this for some period of time, and apparently this was one of the few places on the planet, according to him, based on the thickness of the atmosphere and several other issues, that he could actually see it. So that's very telling, what he was up to. Now, I don't even know what to say. What are your thoughts about
it's
the
incredible.
Fact that he was, if he was able to see it, that means it was probably within the not the inner planets, but at least on the inside of Pluto, such that he could see it. I mean, just think about an 8-inch scope, its range of limitation.
I mean, the guy was about to give the biggest discovery of our century, if not our millennium, Gerald, to the public. He was about to release tangible evidence of this. He went looking for it and he got it, and he was in the place and the one location on the planet to do that. Fast-acting cancer killed him, and look what happened to the Nibiru Planet X hypothesis after that. It fell.
I know.
It
exactly.
Basically disappeared. And if you look at the list of articles going back to the 50s, Gerald, go to the 30th of November 91, where science say goodbye to the 10th planet. There is no 10th planet.
Exactly. Yeah, so right after Harrington died, all of a sudden you saw in the media this smear campaign to make Nibiru go away. It was very, very telling. And you can only see these kind of things in retrospect.
Yeah. I mean, and they did a good job. They buried the story of Nibiru. Only for it to resurface as just this thing in the Earth cloud, and it's like, it's not Nibiru, it's a Planet X again. This Nibiru seems to be disengaged from Planet X. This Planet X is supposed to be a new astronomical scientific hypothesis, and the word Nibiru is like this dirty word associated with Sumerian.
Exactly. It's like exactly what they did with UFOs. If you used to talk about a UFO, you were made to be shameful because you must be losing your faculties, right? Well, it's the same thing that they're doing with Nibiru.
Mm-hmm. But make no mistake, this Nibiru isn't going away, Gerald. I mean, it's incredibly interesting because there's something there. There's something tangible. There's a lot of scientific data, a lot of historical data. And Harrington's analysis really, the fact that they buried that for so long, that's one thing, but it's not gone forever, Gerald. I mean, there's too many people on the case
now. No, it's not. So, do you want to take a break and then come back and do some
let's take
data
a break
analysis?
Let's take a break because we want to get into where this leads us now. I mean, we'll come back after the break and we'll get into where we're at with it now today, and we'll take it, what's happened since Harrington's time. What can we do? What can we tell? And what can we find out? And is there any prediction, or is there any safe zone we can say? I mean, at the end of the day, if this thing is incoming, Gerald, we're going to want to know about it. I mean, it'll probably wipe out half the planet if it comes in close. It might come and, have a safe passing, Gerald, but if there's anything we can know about it, even predict a kind of window of opportunity when this thing's going to appear, or if there's anything we can know, we'll try and guesstimate. We'll do a guesstimate or a best guess. But we'll come back on the break and we'll get into what happened since Harrington's time.
Okay, sounds great.
Hi everybody, welcome back to Capricorn Radio. This is your host James, and you can catch everything I'm doing on the Capricorn members page, or capricornradio.com. will take you to the free 1 hour shows as well. But of course, become a member. You can catch the shows as they are released in the member section. Of course, you're going to listen to today's author at geraldclark77.com and read all about him there. And we are talking today about Nibiru. And for those that didn't pick up before the break, Gerald had to prompt me to go to break because I got so excited talking about Nibiru. But are you back with me, Gerald?
Yeah, brother, I'm back with you.
Hey, I got so excited talking about it. I forgot to go to break, Gerald. I was in Planet Nibiru land there. I was like, I'm just so enthralled in what we're talking about, Gerald. It's incredibly exciting to get down to some kind of, to synthesize the data and to get to the heart of what's going on. I definitely think, Gerald, there's a lot of disinformation out there. I mean, there's a minefield of disinformation, and there's people out there very hungry to know what on earth is going on with this, because number one, is it real? Number two, is it coming our way? It's two simple questions, Gerald. Very, very, very simple questions, and very realistic questions, very pertinent questions. Is it real? Is it coming our way? It's one question follows the other. I don't want to be a prediction machine either, Gerald, and I don't want to do what the others are doing out there, but I do want to do today's show for the purpose of trying to find out some answers, and there's going to be one I think we can speculate and we can put a window there, I guess, at best. I think it's safe to do that. But yeah, I mean, where are we at since Harrington's day? I mean, things start to really go by the wayside in the research. I mean, they really did hit a curveball at Nibiru research there with that one, Gerald, and they just, they seem to smash all any serious research. It's taken a long time to get back on track.
Well, it seems like a couple of things. Number one, there's been a stake put in the ground by two doctors, Dr. Harrington and Dr. Neugebauer, both significant characters who were at the forefront with their hands on the money, on the instruments, looking out in space. Okay, so I really wanted to defer to that and focus on the data that they gave out so that we could go forward. Now, before we get too much farther past Harrington and all this disinformation campaign, from the point where he met with Sitchin in August 30th of 1990, he showed an orbital map that caused me to think to myself, would he be carrying a map around that was not to scale? Because he had specifically drawn Nibiru just outside of Pluto at that time. Okay? Mm-hmm. So the distance outside of these orbital lines that he had drawn for these other planets, was that significant? Did he do it based on a scale? So we started with the cylinder seal, VA-243, found out that was scaled, which scientifically is very hard to refute. Okay? Mm-hmm. And I hope Sitchin sits up in his grave and salutes us for doing that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For sure. So we're talking about a real stake in the ground, circa 1978, when they first commissioned these probes to go look at it, all the way up to 1990, he's meeting with Sitchin saying, yeah. Now, from that chart that he gave us in 1990, we have to assume that the observation that he had for Nibiru was at that location at that time. Now, to be fair, in 1981, when that Detroit article came out, and then the Tombaugh article in the New York Times in 1983, Neugebauer said it was 50 billion miles away, whereas Harrington said it was only 5 billion miles beyond Pluto. Well, depending on how fast it was moving, from 1981 to 1990, when he met with Sitchin, if it was moving, it could have already been parallel with or inside of Pluto by that point. Is the point I'm making. Okay? Mm-hmm. So then it brings up to their question, well, we know it's 1,800 miles, or 1,800 years straight line out if it takes a 3,600 year orbit, if you believe all the records that say a SAR which the Sumerian Kings list were written in, SARS, which was a 3,600-year period. So if you believe that to be true, take half of that. That's how far out it takes to go in and then go back out, right? So then, using distance equals rate times time, you can figure that out. But before we do that, let's go back to Harrington's scaling on his map. So what I did is I took his map with the orbital plane lines that are shown for our known 9 planets, and then the spot he had drawn as a circle for Nibiru at some distance outside of Pluto's orbit, okay? So I said, well, is it to scale? And I wanted to know this because if he had drawn it where he believed it was to scale, then all of a sudden we would have a point in time to know exactly where it was, right? Oh, and this is the whole question, is we know the data's out there. Somebody's got it in their hands that's looking at either Pioneer 10, Pioneer 11, Voyager 1 or 2. Whoever's looking at that data, they have the answers, okay? And so everyone else, in my opinion, is speculating. Only those people have it. And it looks like it went from JPL / United States Naval Observatory handling of this matter over to NASA. Did you notice that? So everything now comes through NASA. Whereas before it was through these rogue scientists that were actually open and discussing and were probably honorable. Mm-hmm. At least Harrington was.
At least Harrington, anyway.
Okay, so I measured the distance from the sun to Pluto, the sun to Nibiru, took those linear distances and assumed that they were to a scale, and then solved for the rate, distance equals rate times time for Nibiru, and then tried to calculate, or actually I solved for the distance first, to see if what the distance was corresponded with what Harrington believed. And it turns out, in that calculation, Nibiru was 6.66 billion miles away from the sun. If his orbital chart was to scale. Now, remember, he said it was just outside of Pluto, and he thought it was 5 billion miles away in 1981, or 1983. Actually, he said it in 81. It showed up in 83. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if it's moving, it's inbound toward perihelion, then at this point in time, it would have been 8.6 billion miles. Well, now here in 1990, in his diagram, he's got it down at 6.6 billion. Well, if you were to actually go one step further and assume those two calculations are correct based on him, you've got 2 points in time and you could calculate the velocity. Sure. The real question is, how many astronomical units is Nibiru really from the sun? And because we don't know whether Neugebauer is telling the truth about 50 billion miles, no. Just because Neugebauer said their IRAS said it was 50 billion miles away in 1981 doesn't mean it was at aphelion. Okay? It was somewhere in its orbit. That's not how far away it was, so you could calculate the rate part, okay?
Gotcha.
So, gotcha. I think there is an ephemeral calculation where you can take, if you knew the mass exactly, you can calculate what the orbit would be to be 3,600 years, and it would tell you how many astronomical units it is away from the sun. And I can take this one step further and do that, okay? But just based on a linear analysis, to see if Harrington's chart was to scale, it looks like it possibly was. Because 6.6 billion miles is just outside of the 3.6 billion miles for Pluto, and it's less than the 8.67 billion miles that it would have been in 1981 when he first discussed it.
Allows it time to get to where it is in 1990, basically.
Well, that means Neugebauer and him are off by 43.34 billion years away.
If anything, it indicates that Neugebauer is off with his data, and that Harrington was right on the money with his data, and that his drawing was to scale as well. It seems to indicate.
Well, I went back and forth questioning whether it was to scale, and now that I've come back and looked at the document, realized what he said, and what he did in 1991, where he went to New Zealand to actually look at it with an 8-inch scope. That means it was coming in close. Listen, I used to have a telescope. Mm-hmm. And it was a variety called a Schmidt-Cassegrain.
I know them, yeah.
And the reason those are popular is because you can get a lot of length in your viewing angle and have a short longitudinal axis because it uses a reflection inside.
Yeah, it's like half the length of a normal Newtonian or Dove.
Exactly. So if he had only an 8-inch scope, I suspect it was a Schmidt cast. Well, I've used one of those, and I know what the limitations are. I mean, you've got to have something in pretty close to be looking at something with an 8-inch scope. So what I'm saying is Harrington was on to something in 1991 where he went to look at it and was about to disclose this. That means it was inside the orbit of Pluto by that point. To me, that's what that means. For him to be able to take an 8-inch scope and see it, and this is where it gets really crazy in some of the analysis I did, okay? Are you with me?
I'm here, bro. I'm here.
Yeah, so at this point in time, I'm starting to bounce a couple things through my head going, well, okay, well, let's be conservative and assume that Neugebauer's distance of 50 billion miles could be used. And let's even be further worst case, let's assume that's at aphelion. Okay, that it's in its farthest orbit, just for fun. Maybe that's why he gave that number, don't know. But that number is important in order to determine the correct speed. Okay, because we have the time. We know it takes 1,800 years if you believe half of a SAR is what it would take to come in and then another half SAR to go out.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
So that number comes out to be 27,777,777 miles per year if you use 50 billion miles in 1,800 years. That's what I call the Neugebauer rate. So what can we do with that? Well, we can then use that to see how long it would take Nibiru to come inbound, okay? And instead of going from a historical point in time in the past, we could take this observation, whether Harrington's right or whether Neugebauer's right. We have some data from a real satellite or from an IRAS scope. Okay,
Sure.
And that's really important to stay scientific here.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple of things we need to know to play these games. And we're going to use Pluto as an outer boundary because it's the last one out there at the edge of our known solar system, sans Nibiru. And it sits at 3.6750050 billion miles. Okay, so it's just call it 3.67 billion miles, okay, from the sun. Right? So how many years does it take Pluto to come to its inner orbit or perihelion with the sun? Well, we know what this is. It's 248 years. Okay, so here's something in my head I would use as a milestone, that if Nibiru came parallel to Pluto and traveled at the same rate that Pluto did, it would take 248 years to make the perihelion. Okay? Now, there's something else that you have to consider here is when a planet comes close to the central sun and goes around it and then goes back out to its orbit, especially if it's an elliptical orbit, which most of them are, especially the outer planets, then it gets a little slingshot effect when it comes in close. Okay, so it travels faster near the sun than it does when it's at the furthest point away from the sun. So it's not, so what I have calculated for Neugebauer's rate is an average speed, but it does not take into account the slingshot effect. Okay?
Yeah.
And it's very significant.
Oh, yeah. Especially on the elliptical, which is, taking Nibiru's highly elliptical orbit. That's got to be a pretty high sling.
So, and also based on its size, and I messed around with a little bit, and I think I have a figure that basically it will be 20 times faster at aphelion, or perihelion than it would be at aphelion, meaning the furthest distance away. It's going to be slower by a factor of 20 and faster by a factor of 20 when you get close to the sun.
Wow.
Okay, so so that's significant. So anyway, so now we have a marker, 248 years that it takes Pluto at the edge of our solar system to come in around the sun. Okay, there's just something real physical and tangible that we can compare with, right? So where we left off was if Nibiru got parallel with Pluto, how long would it take? Well, that comes down to how fast it's traveling. Okay, so this becomes the next important thing. So we just said that Harrington, with his 8-inch scope in New Zealand at this special location at this particular point in time, must have thought he could see Nibiru coming in from the southern hemisphere about to cross our solar ecliptic and go in behind the sun, where it would be lost for some period of years or portion of a year, and then re-emerge as it's heading back out toward aphelion. Okay? So how long does it take by the time it crosses our Mars, Jupiter, or apparently between Mars and Jupiter is where it crosses near the asteroid belt. Mm-hmm. And that would be the place where it would cross our solar ecliptic and then go back behind our sun, ricochet around it, or slingshot around it, and then come back out to the side, right? So in my opinion, Harrington had to have thought it was coming close to the point where he could see it in the galactic ecliptic, meaning it was not only inside Pluto, but was approaching the place where he could see it coming between Mars and Jupiter. So that's like, wow, that's really advanced if it was that far in, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so anyway, so we got this marker, 248 years. Don't lose track of that. So the next thing I thought, well, what if it comes up parallel with Pluto based on this Neugebauer rate? How long would it take to come inbound to the Earth? To the Sun at perihelion? Well, that number turns out to be 3.67 billion miles divided by Neugebauer's rate, that 27 million number I told you. Yep. Well, that comes out to 132 years. So now all of a sudden you go, okay, well, if that's true, then about 1990 or so, when Harrington met with Sitchin, he said it was 5 billion. So so it was still about 5 billion miles outside of Pluto. That's only 3.6 billion. So, maybe 1995. Okay, we'll pick that point and say, well, okay, it's parallel with Pluto. How long would it take to come in? Well, we said 132 years at the Neugebauer rate. So that would be, at 132 to 1995. Well, that still puts it for a piece out, right?
Sure.
Problem is, it doesn't take into account the slingshot rate, because this is the average rate for Neugebauer to go the whole way around. Okay, so this is where the ephemeral calculations are very important.
It's an average rate, and it's also conservative too, Gerald. But yes,
it's conservative, because if Nibiru would actually have been at aphelion, its further distant point when they saw it, and then you divide it by 1800, you could see that number would be bigger, so it would be faster. So it's very conservative, okay? And then I thought, okay, well, let's suppose that Harrington's orbital chart that we think now was to scale indicated that Nibiru was 6.66 billion miles away in 1990, in August. Okay, so now we have a specific date, a specific location. Let's use this average rate and see what the worst case would be. Well, that number comes out using Neugebauer's rate to be 239 years from the point where he showed it on that map, which is outside of Pluto. Okay?
Sure.
So I batted about in my document, well, maybe, that's because it wasn't to scale. Then I noted that if you took 1983 and added 33 years, it came out to 2016. And I'll show you, I'm not going to tell you why I did that, but you'll see it in the document. Okay, it's quite significant. So it comes out to 2016. Very interesting. So in the first table that I did, table 3, I call it the Nibiru transit table. I took the distance from Pluto as the outer edge. We knew that was about 248 years. Took Neugebauer's rate, and then I added a few scalars, 1 through 5, to add this slingshot effect, because I didn't know what it was for a planet the size of Nibiru. Well, it turns out I found a little bit more about it later. Well, so we said at a scalar of 1, it takes 132 years to come in. So that would put you in at 2115. That's a long ways away.
Okay, 2115.
You take that scalar up to 2, it cuts it in half. Now you're at 2049. And let's go all the way up to 5, or number 4, a velocity scalar of 4. Now you're looking, number of years to perihelion is 33. There's that 33 I was just telling you about. And that comes out to the year 2016. So all of a sudden I saw this and I thought, those numbers are kind of looking real now. This could be real, okay?
It is, and here's the thing, Gerald. This is very realistic and conservative math. It's not extravagant. It's not working the numbers. This is basically accommodating all the known factors that we have.
Well, actually, I'll tell you right now, when I went further and looked up the slingshot effect of a planet in perihelion, it looks like the speed factor could be a factor of 20 different. I only went up to 5. And it landed us conservatively from the edge of Pluto inward at the year 2016, only using a scalar of 4. I can go all the way up to 20 based on what I know. So that adds some corrective factor to the bad Neugebauer rate because we didn't have the measurement of the planet at aphelion. Okay, so that's where the conservative part of this comes in. Mm-hmm. Now, if you go up to a scalar of 5, that shows that it would have crossed perihelion in 2009. Okay, so then you ask yourself, well, how long could it be behind the sun? Well, this data that I had showed that from the time it comes inside of Neptune to the time it comes back out takes 30 years. Whereas at the other end, at aphelion, it takes 800 years to do the same distance. Remember the factor of 20.
Wow.
Or 600 years. 600. It was a factor of 20. So 30 on one and 600 on the other. So now all of a sudden you say, well, by the time it gets near Neptune, you mean it could be all the way at perihelion within 30 years? Sure enough, could. So the next thing I did is I took Harrington's distance of 6.6 billion miles, which was 5 billion miles, or the one from his orbital chart. Okay, oh, yeah. Well, it looks like it was to scale. In the worst case, we could take that number to 8.67 billion miles, which is not a long distance in astronomical terms. Okay.
No.
And we could use that as our point to calculate how long it would take Nibiru to come into perihelion with the sun, just like we did if it was parallel with Pluto. So this is just outside of Pluto. Using the Neugebauer rate again, and this time I added a few more scalars because I wanted to see what it would take to get it into the time frame of right now. Mm-hmm. Okay, and see if it could be potentially correlated with the Earth changes, the change in our gravitational North Pole, and some other things that science seems to have corroborated that is happening. Okay, so I'll just skip forward. If you go to a scalar factor of 7, then that lands you at 2017. And if you go to a scalar factor of 8, it lands you, it looks like I have a mistake in the table. I gotta fix that. It lands you at 2012. Okay, so between only a scalar factor of 7 and 8, it lands us into our current time frame again. And like I told you, the scalar factor looks like it should be as high as 20. So, if Harrington, if that's true, well, let's just play a game. If he was in New Zealand in 1991, where he died trying to see this planet,
yep,
and it was as close in as potentially approaching the galactic ecliptic or the solar ecliptic, coming in from the south in the constellation of Libra near Cassiopeia, like he said. Mm-hmm. Then it could have been just this side of Jupiter. Okay, and if that's the case, then we're already a few planets in from Pluto, and this number would be short. So all of a sudden you realize that either one of these tables, if you take into account the Neugebauer rate is probably off, and the slingshot effect can go all the way up to 20. What I'm telling you is that from the time he looked at it to right now, and you would only have to add about 18 to 22 years, something in that range. Okay, and you would go from 1991 and add that, and you land in our current time frame. So what I'm telling you is,
the numbers are real, Gerald.
Not only due, but it looks like it's potentially in perihelion right now.
Yeah, the numbers are real. I mean, I'm looking at the tables here. I mean, I urge the people, if you want to understand this, you want to get a grip on this, it's the math is a lot easier to understand with the tables and the graphs, and it's quite simple and logical to follow. It's just a couple of simple equations, and you've done it really well as well, Gerald. I mean, the numbers make sense. I mean, the numbers are very realistic, and the window, Gerald, is the window that we're in now.
Well, this is what kind of put few chills on the back of my neck, and realized, kind of like, this brought me full circle. You realize, in my first book, The Anunnaki of Nibiru, I took a lot of the research on Nibiru and figured everybody was at this place trying to prove that the Anunnaki were real and that their planet was real. And everybody was in this defensive posture, and it was all information being presented in a way to defend the theory. And I decided to do something a little differently, where I took already translated Sumerian documents. I wasn't defending the translation, and I took them from a source other than Sitchin, because the poor guy was under assault at the time. And I took them from the Oxford University, right? Those 3 basic ones, all you need to do to get the story, it's there. Mm-hmm. And went forward. And so I looked at everything that was going on with Nibiru. I decoded the Enuma Elish. I knew about it from way back when, from reading Sitchin's documents. And so I was kind of already comfortable with the idea that this planet was out there, but because of all the disinformation, in my mind, it had kind of gotten cloudy. Just where the hell is it? Right?
It is.
But after I spent a week and just used the scientific method, which works for me, okay?
Yeah.
And saw the numbers, it was irrefutable to me that there could be people out there that do have pictures of 2 suns in the morning, and those might be real. And I'm going to have to go look at those now, because I really think the numbers just cannot be refuted.
I mean, are we saying, Gerald, this thing is only visible in the southern hemisphere? Is that correct?
Well, what I'm saying is, if Harrington thought he could see it with an 8-inch scope in 1991, fast forward to now, so that's how many years is that? That's 10 years would be 2001, and then add another, so that'd be 26 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's been 26 years. Well, what did we just say about the entire transition from Nibiru, from this inner segment of the elliptical arc? I told you it looks like it only takes 30 years to go from the point just inside Jupiter all the way around. Guess what? It's been 26 years. That means it's in perihelion and it's about to come out. Or it's just coming out and we're just now starting to see it. And these people that are claiming to have pictures of 2 suns, I mean, they're not just a few of them, they're all over the world, would explain a planet that's reflecting the sunlight that's in or close to coming out from right behind the sun, so that you can see it. Now, the real question is, what happens next?
Yeah. You know, and they say in Hamlet's Mill that it is the brightest star in the sky. Nibiru is the brightest star. It makes reference to that. You know, this is incredibly, just to say, John, it is an incredibly difficult task that we're doing here today. It's incredibly difficult to pinpoint Nibiru, to calculate the distance of Nibiru. I mean, but there is a line of research and there is a line of inquiry that you just explained with the scientific method that puts us in tangible parameters. We can say, look, it's in this window here, and, you know, this is conservative information. It could be actually right upon us, or it could be not too far from us. But this window is a lot narrower than we think it is, Gerald.
Yeah, you know, recently I've just had a thought that this Lucifer infrared scope that was put on Mount Graham in Tucson,
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if the timing of when that was built is indicative of where Nibiru was, because you realize if you're in Arizona, you're not down on the South Pole Observatory. You know, you're in the northern hemisphere trying to see this thing now. That means that scope had to be set up to look at it coming out of perihelion.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, you know, if I go back and look, well, when was that thing put together? I think it was around 2007 or 8, something like that. 2009.
Yeah.
So they put everything in place, made sure they had it functional and blah, blah, blah for some period of time before the actual event where they could start seeing it. So I would say, I personally think around 2013, I think it went fully into perihelion from what I can tell, but based on my calculations here.
Can we talk about the Google Sky analysis, Gerald?
Oh, sure.
I want to mention this because the picture on Google Sky is the one that I've been seeing. I wasn't even aware of this, but it looks like there's two horns on it, like the winged disc.
Yeah, we had one photo, by the way. We kind of passed over this, but we had one photo I found on the internet. This figure 14 in my document here on page 30. Okay, that apparently got leaked. I don't generally like to follow threads where I can't get any tangible data, but it's the only one that supposedly was leaked from NASA. Now, I can't back that up, but I just thought I'd provide it in a link to where it came from so people can look that up. So I put that up there. But as far as Google Sky goes, I think this is a really neat tool. I don't know if people have ever used it. And, you've got the Google Earth that lets you navigate the whole spherical globe of the planet, which is really fun. Mm-hmm. And also now they have this Google Sky, so you can bring up this tool. So you have Google Earth open. It's one of the task menus or the menu items at the top that lets you change the sky mode. Well, a lot of people use this for looking at ephemeris and orbits and lots of different things. And I thought, well, if Harrington was looking in the constellation Libra from the southern hemisphere for this thing to come in, what do we have in the reports on the internet, whether it's fallacy or fact, that corroborate with some object that's been found that might be this item, that maybe have a different designator or something like that, right? So I started looking around, and I found some conspiratorial kind of things. Whether it's true or not, I can't say. But one link on Google Sky came up and said, hey, here's a position in Google Sky where we think Nibiru is. And they had classified it as HD 37784. Now, I got to go back and look back at NASA now and see everything I can find about HD 37784 and why that was chosen. And it turns out it's in a constellation that looks like Scorpio, not Libra. So anything that showed up in Harrington's orbital chart from Libra over all the way down to or from Libra all the way up to Pisces, I believe it was. I made it fair game to possibly observe it in Google Sky and see what I could find. Okay, so I went through this, and even there was an area that some people claimed where Nibiru was on the online multiverse that was blacked out by Google. And I thought, well, those are always interesting areas. Why would you black out an area unless you just didn't want people to look there, right? So I gave the coordinates of that. I went to try to find it, and I was unable to find that. But if you could find what that is, it'd probably be pretty telling if they're eliminating some data so that you can't see it, okay? Given what we know about NASA and their connection with Google and the three-letter agencies, okay? So anyway, I put HD 37784 Google Sky, and it brings up kind of this bright constellation, and then right next to it, just down and to the left, you can see this winged-looking disk planet that's somewhat orangish red that people have claimed is Nibiru. And I thought, okay, well, great, there's a picture. It's pretty big. You can't tell much else from it. So I went, that's figure 15. Then I went and looked it up on Google Sky with just a different perspective, zoomed out a little bit so I could see where it was. It was just north of Orion's belt, north of Betelgeuse, and I don't know. It wasn't hard to find if you went from there. Okay, mm-hmm. So I think it's right next to 121 Tau as well. Okay, but anyway, I gave you a picture of it, and actually the coordinates show up the lat long, so you can put it in if you want. But if you just put HD space 37784, it'll bring it in. You can zoom out and see this view. Okay, well, I went to skymap.org based on this information on this reporting. It was reported in 1989, by the way, and they called it HD 1989. It was called Tycho 2-2000 as another name, USNO-A2.0. So that's the United States Naval Organization, Naval Observatory. That's where Harrington worked. Okay. Then there's a BSC. I'm not sure what that means, but it was dated 1991. So this one kind of got my attention. I thought, well, maybe there's something here. Mm-hmm. Listed in the constellation Taurus. We have the coordinates for it. And I thought, well, it kind of has the attributes of Nibiru with that, it looks like a wings coming off the side, which is shown on some of their depictions for Nibiru. So I thought, okay, well, it's conspiratorial. I don't view it as hard scientific, but here's what we have. So I provided that as well. Okay. And they also gave you the distance it's away.
Incredible, Gerald. Incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's stuff out there. I don't know if that's it, but it gives you something to look at. Okay.
Wow.
Okay. So I was going to include some of the pictures of the two suns that everybody's talking about, calling it Nibiru. Listen, I've dismissed every one of those. Number one, I started out dismissing anything that saw it before it was inside of Pluto, for that matter, unless you had a IRAS scope. Because of the temperature of the planet and being that far away from the sun, you just could not see it without a super cool device. Mm-hmm. Now, once you got in closer, seeing it with the naked eye, or potentially with a scope like Harrington had, is possible. Okay. So where does that take us to? Possibly down to what the Colbrin Bible had to say about this, or what do you think?
Oh yeah, let's mention the Colbrin Bible. I'm not entirely sure on the background of the Colbrin Bible, but I actually, until today's show, Gerald, I've heard of the Colbrin Bible by name. I never looked at it before, never looked into it, but it's incredibly interesting document, Gerald.
It is. I tried to follow the creation account of man in the Colbrin Bible, trying to correlate the names of the Anunnaki and such, and I have to be honest with you, I really couldn't make the correlation. There's some very interesting correlations between the functional story and also a lot of stuff about Nibiru. That's the part I kind of wanted to focus on. And that's from the Book of Creation, chapter 3. Okay. Mm-hmm. So they talk about Nibiru, Planet X, being a very large, it says it's cold but bright, and beneath its belly was a huge trail of smoke and debris that it drags along. And basically that seems to be the genesis of where the depictions of it, calling it a dragon, were, in the sky, that it's this long entourage of debris that gets dragged through the asteroid belt when it comes through. Because remember, it crosses between Mars and Jupiter. That's where the asteroid belt is. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It talks about significantly in the Colbrin Bible about it being a destroyer planet, and that every time it did come through, I mean, the descriptions, and I don't know that we want to get all into that. It's kind of like Revelations. It's pretty vivid as it talks about what this planet does as it comes through. It talks about it burning the surface of the planet.
Oh, gruesome.
Boiling all the water off. Nothing survives, okay? Men were stricken with terror, went mad at the awful sight in the heavens. Well, where have we heard that before? That came right out of Revelations, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's talking about wormwood and all the evils that came with the plagues of Egypt. Well, a lot of people have seen that as a comet or a planet crossing that caused a lot of perturbations in space and caused those pestilences and plagues to happen on the Earth. So they kind of see it as related. And so does the Colbrin Bible.
It's incredible stuff, Gerald. For me, Nibiru is real. I have no doubt about it. From ancient texts or scientific data or both, I mean, Nibiru is real. Is it incoming? it's incoming. It's just a matter of how far on that journey it is. And I think we've got some answers today, Gerald. I think we've reduced the data down to some very, very synthesized analysis. It's just how accurate can you try and refine your data now at this stage, Gerald? But it's incredibly...
like I said, only those who have the ephemeris for the planet could actually answer exactly where it is.
Yeah.
Based on our narrowing it down and all the evidence, I would not have believed it had I not sat down and put all the numbers in front of me. But I truly believe that it's already in perihelion.
Yeah, which is a difficult task, but I keep telling you this, Gerald. I mean, I'm sure you know more than anybody. I mean, this took you a week to prepare for this show, but I commend you on that. It's an excellent document you put together, and it's backed up with just the pure facts and the pure science and the pure logic of it. Let's speculate a bit, Gerald, just to wrap up. I mean,
okay. Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to go too heavy on fear mongering, but I mean, NASA knows about this. I mean, I've no doubt. I mean, if this thing is coming in and it's where we think it is, or it's even, approaching us. I mean, NASA's known about this for a long time. Governments have known about this for a long time, Gerald.
Yeah, I think every government on the planet knows about it. And recently from NASA, we've heard about, we're going out looking for these Earth-like planets all over our galaxy now that we realize there's so many. And then just recently, and I was looking for it just yesterday or the day before, I heard that NASA had announced this new planet that they had found inside of Neptune. And I was like, what? Or a new body of some sort. And it's like, really? No matter whether it was a comet or a planet, I can't remember. It was significant news, and I couldn't find it in time to get it into this document, but I wanted to. So fast forwarding to now, people can look around the planet and go, well, let's assume that it was true. How would people respond? Well, you can go to like the movie 2012 and look how the government responded. Don't tell anybody. Have a refugee plan for those that are serving the government, for continuity of government, and everybody else gets sacrificed and not told. Sure. And I thought about that. That's very conspiratorial. But let's play a game.
I think it's very realistic, Gerald. I don't think it's I think it's very realistic. I don't think.
Well, yeah. Well, let's play another game. The Cold War went on since the 50s with Russia, since World War II, and at some point, it got so bad here in the United States that we believed a nuclear assault was imminent on our homeland, and people were building underground shelters left and right all over the country. Okay, and at the same time, everybody realized that they were vulnerable too from an intercontinental ballistic missile, all governments around the world. And they started burrowing in, at least initially at their presidential headquarters, underground bases where they could survive a surface impact from a nuclear device, or even one that blew up above the surface and caused an EMP. Right? Well, they could still do just as much damage depending on what altitude they were exploded. So the general idea is everybody realized there was a danger from the air and that they had to have a survival plan for continuity of government first, underground. And some countries like Russia went so far as to build underground facilities for their entire populace, whereas other ones didn't, like the United States, or at least they didn't tell you if they did.
Well, I think the underground bases, though, Gerald, have been on the increase since the IRAS satellite data, and I think that the nuclear arsenal is actually, it's on the decline. They're decommissioning nuclear subs and nuclear, not totally. I mean, they're trying to reduce the numbers. They're not trying to increase it. They're trying to reduce the numbers of nuclear arsenal. That doesn't make sense to me that they're still in this nuclear mode, or they're still in this nuclear operation. I think that they're trying to decrease the nuclear arms because they realize that they're not going to push the button. Out of all the nuclear arsenal and the stockpiles that are out there, Gerald, they cannot let one of them off again. Not one of them. They just can't. If Americans ever did what they did on Hiroshima again, they would be shunned on this planet. There's nobody who would speak to them. They did what they did back in 1945 in the World War II when they dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. I mean, they did what they did back then. I mean, that was the first time ever. You know, if they ever did that again, Gerald, they would be frowned upon. There was nobody I mean, where would they do it anyway? It's just the most inhumane thing to do, just to incinerate people like that, you know? You know, so they can't do it. They know they can't do it. I mean, even if they wanted to flex their muscles and control somebody, wouldn't matter how bad that other nation was or what that nation did. They just can't do it, and they know they can't do it. So the nuclear arsenal.
But they can take depleted uranium and put it into armament, fire it onto a foreign country's battlefield, and leave it there radiating and get away with it that way.
Oh, sure.
So, yeah, well, you know, we're kind of getting into a little bit about conspiratorial things and corroborating actions by governments and peoples to determine, is this information real? And if it was, how would they respond? In general, that's what we're saying.
Yeah.
So, you know, so the fact that there's been a catalyst to cause governments to build underground facilities since the 1950s, that one isn't all telling for me. Has there been an increase in underground preparation and storing up the rat nest for water and food and so on and so forth since the first article was released by Harrington in 1981? Possibly. That's a very good theory, and if that could be corroborated, then you could say the actions that are being taken for building underground tunnels and connecting them to cities and putting maglev trains and spending our money like that and then leaving you out with no plan would make a lot of sense to me. But right now, in my head, the fact is we can't distinguish the actions of the governments for going underground, whether it's based on the threat of nuclear war or whether it's the threat of Nibiru. And actually, I think they're playing that card very well. Because guess what? Whichever one it was, they have overlapping functions by having a underground facility that could survive either a nuclear winter or the passage of Nibiru.
Overlapping.
At least they think so. At least they think so.
Overlapping function is the key term, Gerald. I mean, maybe they started off with a nuclear scare as the motive, but it's migrated into Nibiru, and they went, well, we already got these underground bunkers. Let's expand on that. And that's now become the new motive. But, like, there's an overlapping function here for sure, Gerald. Look at the Svalbard seed vault as well, Gerald. I mean...
All right. Hey, I was looking at something today on this capabilities for building underground tunnels. Oh, my goodness. I had no idea they had rail devices that are shooting out a plasma laser that are melting cylindrical holes in the material, not even having to excavate.
Mm-hmm.
And they're doing miles at a time in a day. That is unbelievable with this automated device. Think about that.
Sure.
So, you know, did they put a tunnel system all into the United States since the 1950s during the Cold War up until now in preparation for surviving a nuclear winter or the cyclical destruction of the periodic cyclical destruction of the surface of the planet Earth? Based on its interactions with a very large planet that comes around every 3,600 years.
You know,
and by the way, I sent you a table, start with some assumptions about some of these start dates, the Sumerian Kings list back, the Sumerian Kings list forward, and then using these other calculations to see if that was a passage event, what all the other ones were, so you could see forward and backward in time. And then try to corroborate those with events that we knew of in history. So I did a lot of thinking about this last week, okay, is what I want you to know.
Sure.
And I thought that was very telling as well, based on the last one I sent you, assuming that Harrington's data was correct. It lines up very well with some significant events in history.
Ice Age, Thoth building Giza.
Yep.
Yeah.
Even with some of the
creation accounts.
And I know we're not going to talk much about it, but even corresponds with the time frame that Enki was on this planet, and the time frame when humans were genetically known to have been spawned about 220,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a whole bunch of correlations in there that I thought, aha, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, just to surmise, I mean, yeah, without getting too conspiratorial, I mean, I have no doubt. I mean, if these guys know this thing's coming in, they're going to prepare, Gerald. They're going to prepare, and they're going to prepare for the worst. And they're probably already doing that anyway. They've probably got
Okay.
the elitists of the military governments of the world. They've probably got so much money, Gerald. They don't know what to do with it. They've probably nothing else better to do with their bloody money than to start digging tunnels and building safe houses. Just a point worth noting, though, Gerald. This is for the audience. The human race spends 80% of its time undercover, whether that's in your car or in your house, protecting yourself from sun or rain or extreme weather, or underground or inside buildings. The human race spends 80% of its time undercover. And that's what we do as a human race. Whether you're driving to and from work, you're under the roof of your car, you're in work, you're in your home, you're 20% of the time is outside. So we are already a race that lives undercover. It's because we have to, we protect ourselves from just even normal weather that we don't like, but to face something dangerous like Nibiru coming in, if it is a close crossing, if it is close and it affects us, maybe it's not, Gerald. Maybe it's just going to come by and have mild effects like heating up volcanoes and some magnetic effects. I mean,
it looks like I think several times it comes by where it actually maybe causes some effects, but they're not as devastating every single time. It really just depends on where the Earth is relative to when it comes at the crossing point. And by the way, they called it the planet of crossing in New Milish as well for that reason.
Yeah.
So, so here in my mind, I have trouble distinguishing between the adjacent planets experiencing what they're experiencing right now, which is change, as well as our Earth experiencing change, whether that is completely attributable to us passing through the galactic center, which I don't know exactly how long that takes once you start going through there. Well, the Mayans said it started happening around 2011. So how long does it take to go through the galactic center? Maybe 3 years, 3.5 years? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So maybe we're just coming out of that now. And that's where we have this encounter with Nibiru, where it first got trapped in our solar system the first time. Mm-hmm. Don't know. But those two seem to be correlated. So, our bottom line is, are the Earth changes that are taking place? And those changes are undeniable in my mind. I think we looked at the report yesterday. There were 41 earthquakes or volcanoes going off at the same time.
Simultaneously. Yeah.
Now, sometimes they'll get 50 in a year, but not simultaneous.
Yeah. So, which is incredible.
Yeah. And we've had some very large earthquakes, that seem to be correlated with, planetary locations that people have been tracking. So, there are definite changes going on in the weather patterns and the gravitational North Pole has been moving around. And so something is tugging on the Earth. And whether it's the torsion from a dense field that would be at the galactic center based on the gravity differential there, and our Earth spinning and going through it like a gyroscope, like I talked about in my first book, or it's from Nibiru passing through with its constellation, by the way, to the south, causing the Earth's orbital plane to tilt slightly. And if it did it just right, it could cause the Earth to wobble a little bit and cause a very large flood on the surface. And this goes back to writings about Charles Hapgood and such, whether he was credited or not. But there were writings about these kind of things, Velikovsky's writings, and also this Hamlet Mill document you gave me, and the Colbrin Bible. There's clearly something that periodically comes through and disturbs life on this planet, usually resulting from disturbing the sun, causing a CME or some sort of discharge such that the surface becomes uninhabitable, or could result in a watery death if the Earth gets wobbled on its axis.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And right now it looks like we're not getting wobbled, but we're definitely getting pulled off our axis. Well, what if the thing that's pulling us off the axis goes goes away. Will we slowly come back and not have a flood event? I don't know. The other concern is when it does come around and goes back out toward aphelion, it's going to be dragging all these asteroids that brought in the perihelion with it.
Sure.
And when those cross the solar ecliptic, where all of our planets rotate in the opposite direction, they're going to have an encounter with some of this debris. So that's another concern that some people are probably concerned about.
Wow. Well, Gerald, we're out of time. We're at the top of the second hour. Of course, GeraldClark77.com. You'll catch the article that Gerald did for today's show there. Of course, I'll stick a link in the YouTube description if you're listening on YouTube. And great research, Gerald. Great. I commend you on that today. I really thank you for that. It's great to get to some answers and some realistic discussion based on science.
Do you feel like you got to some answers today?
I do, and it's because of the logic and the science that we followed. Follow the scientific methods. Don't get too wild on your keep some conservative approach there, and we did that, Gerald. And
you also have to allow your imagination to say what if, to see if dots connect, so that you can establish a new theory. Because science is nothing but a bunch of theories that are supported by facts. Well, so you can't be afraid to, and I've been very conservative that way, is to, especially with something that's life and death like this, is to make inferences. And I do want to just put a plug out there and say, I wrote a very long conclusion to this document that's 49, the whole document's 49 pages long. So I wrote about 6 pages in the conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And, if the data's real,
mm-hmm.
and the tunnel building and the government's plan to continue itself involves underground facilities, then you're not invited. Hey, you got some emotional issues to deal with and some real life decisions to make that have to do with facing your Faustian cliff and your own death. And that's intense for people. That's probably why this topic is one of the number one topics to be looked at on the internet right now. It's just unbelievable how much interest there is.
I think that's what I think that's what gathers the attention, Gerald. As negative as it is, I think that's what gathers the attention.
I know. Well, so I tried to at least make an attempt at my position on how I would face this event and how I see myself in a bigger scheme relative to some of the other writings that I've done especially in the second book. So I won't tell you what it is now, but I hope it hits its mark. Because it's very, very, it's a very deep topic. It's very intense for people it's like finding out you have cancer and you got 6 months to live. Now what
exactly.
Are you gonna go fill out a bucket list and go experience the hedonism of the external world to the best that you did, so you didn't feel like you missed a thing? Or are you gonna go inside and try to figure out what this evolution and ascension thing is all about?
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you mentioned ascension.
Deep thing that it brings up whenever you look at this data, and it hits you right between the eyes.
I'm glad you mentioned ascension there. You reminded me of the Ascension Symposium in discussing the Anunnaki in the Yucatan, Gerald. We have a conference coming up September. There's limited places, so if anybody wants to get involved with the limited places, sign up at GeraldClark77.com, or you can see it on JamesSwagger.com as well. You'll catch myself and Gerald there doing a small, cozy symposium. We're going to talk about all sorts of wonderful stuff, and you can catch the whole program, what we're going to do there. But Gerald, I really thank you for your time today, and I appreciate the effort you put in for today's show. What a production and a great article. I mean, it's almost like a mini book, Gerald. It really is, and I really thank you for that.
Well, us engineers, you being one, we connected as engineers, and we have expectations about doing things right. Right? Sure. The devil's in the details. So, if you want people to be able to follow the threads and get to an answer, you don't do stuff and put your arms around it and say, well, this is mine. It's all about my ego. And, I should be giving tenure here. Instead, we're approaching this from a different standpoint. You and I aren't being paid anything to do this.
Sure.
But to just explore the truth. And I appreciate that about you as well, because I know not everybody would sit down and read a 49-page document before committing to do a radio show. You expect a lot from me, but I expect a lot from you too, and it works for us.
No, it's cool, bro. It's cool. Well, Gerald, we'll pick up the podcast on the Emerald Tablets next time, but for now, we'll finish off the show, and I look forward to the next show in the not too distant future.
Me too, brother. It's been great. I really appreciate you.